Hello and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment and followed it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. This week's guest is the editor and founder of AudioFile magazine, the premier publication for the audiobook industry, Robin Whitten. The very first issue of AudioFile in June of 1992 featured reviews of our first audiobooks, Old Doc Methuselah, Battlefield Earth, both read by Roddy McDowell, and Buckskin Brigades, read by Bruce Boxleitner. I became friends with Robin when I became actively involved with the Audio Publishers Association in 2008, of which I was a fellow board member for a few years. I don't know that anyone knows the audiobook industry better than Robin. I am so looking forward to speaking with her today about the history of the audiobook industry. Welcome, Robin.
Hello, John. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes, me too. It's one of those things when I listen to an audiobook probably once or a week or every 2 weeks I get through an audiobook because that's how I usually prepare for my podcast interviews. And it just dawned on me, what about Robin? So then it was like, then I wrote to you and it was like, sure, this would be great. So getting a 1-2 punch on the audiobook industry, you as the creator of AudioFile magazine and probably the history of audiobooks is, like I said, known by no one better than yourself. And then also getting Michelle as the executive director of the Audio Publishers Association, I think it's a really good grounding in audiobooks and how aspiring writers can actually get involved and take advantage of the audiobook industry for their intellectual properties. So this is great.
Great. It'd be fun to talk about it all if I can keep the history straight.
Good. So how'd you get started with audiobooks to begin with?
Well, I started as an audiobook listener, being interested in the medium and quite mesmerized by how powerful it was and how it would hold my attention in a way that certainly when you read a good book, you're really involved in it. But, listening to an audiobook and being, going around the block or taking the long way home, all of those things that listeners experience, it suddenly dawned on me that this was really an art form and that the narrators were crafting a quite an amazing performance of the work that the author had created. So that fascinated me. And at the time, in the early 1990s, there was very little being written about audiobooks. There were audiobooks primarily in libraries and some in bookstores, some through publishers, but they were scarce. And it was a format that a lot of people were unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it was up to that point, audiobooks was something through the libraries, and I think it was also for the blind or for vision impaired.
Right. So for vision impaired people and blind, that was where originally it may have started. But it was also, I think, a way in the early days in the 1950s of audiobooks, of a way of making archival recordings, because we have some great poets and authors who were alive reading their own works. And that was a way to create an oral history that otherwise would not exist. And but obviously, by the 1990s, things had evolved quite a bit, and the industry was really set to take off in a way that now it has, and become a format that most people are familiar with. There are passionate fans of audiobook listening everywhere. We can talk to our podcast listeners here about coming over to the audiobook side a little bit from their listening experience. Yep.
Yeah. Now then, so you were a fan to begin with. So what was the inspiration that got the creation of AudioFile to materialize?
So I guess the idea was that I was fascinated with the format. Very little was available, particularly to libraries, to make choices about their purchase of audiobooks. And it was all very dependent on the book and what anyone had written about the actual text copy. And I really felt strongly that this was a performance medium. So there were creative choices made from the get-go by the narrators. And so it should be reviewed the way we review concerts and films, anything with the and focused on the creative side, because all those choices are being made. So I had chatted with our library director about it, and he said, "Oh, that's a great idea. Libraries would use that idea of reviews because they're used to using reviews." So in my naivete, I said, "Oh, I can do that." I had another job, but I can do that. I can write reviews of audiobooks. And so in June of 1992, we came out with the very first issue of AudioFile. It was about 12 pages, desktop publishing, which was a thing then. And that's how it started. And obviously, we have changed a lot. We have broadened our platform, but we're still in print. And, AudioFile goes on trying to help people find their great next audiobook.
Absolutely. Now, in the course of your 27, 28, 29 years with AudioFile, how many reviews have you actually done for audiobooks?
Well, we have published over 50,000 audiobook reviews.
Wow.
And if you want to check them all out, they're at our website. So if you know what you're looking for, you can search all kinds of favorite authors and narrators, topics for audiobooks.
Yeah, so that's audiofilemagazine.com.
That is the correct website. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
We'll be saying it multiple times throughout this interview here to make sure people get that. Now, there was a period, because I remember talking with Barbara Rosenblatt, and she said when she first started doing audiobooks, she did it for the libraries, for was it the Library of Congress, doing the things for the blind?
Yeah, the Talking Book program.
Talking Book program. She got started, and then she emerged into actually doing audiobooks. At what point did audiobooks become an actual thing that wasn't just something for the blind?
I think in the early 1970s was the first time that libraries certainly started to collect audiobooks for their general patrons. And so I think that's a good place to start. And as I said, it was hard to find audiobooks. And so, but the libraries were a great source, and libraries have always been such a proponent of audiobooks, collecting them, staying up with the formats, because that's another thing that has changed so much from the cassettes that were being scattered around people's cars in the 1970s. To our digital download format now.
With the CDs in between.
And the CDs in between, right? Exactly. And now you can barely get a cassette player to play cassettes. If, a lot of people still have audiobooks on cassette, and you see them in yard sales and things, but you're hard pressed to find a player that will play them.
For sure. And anything that old as well, the tape is starting to get kind of brittle too. So you're going to have that problem, depending upon where they were actually kept.
Right. And that's an exciting part of contemporary audiobooks, is how much the quality of sound has changed.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. So one thing that's, I think, really cool about AudioFile is that you feature the talent. Obviously, you got the publishers that do it, and you got the authors that wrote it. But the talent that perform it gives them a platform which they don't otherwise receive. So what was the inspiration of that?
Well, I think when we're really talking about an audiobook listening experience, it's the narrators who make the magic. Because if it's a good narrator who really understands what the author intended and has really great skills, then they make a magical experience for us as listeners. So, it always seemed to me that they should be in the spotlight. And we do as much as we can to really emphasize that, to do stories and features on the narrators. We let them do little videos to talk about an audiobook they're excited about. We do podcasts. I mean, it's really one of the ways that we feel we give a broad look at all the parts of audiobooks. And for listeners, it's that voice. Essentially, that's what they're going to remember, is the voice that they listen to for hours and hours through that audiobook.
Yeah, it's interesting because talking to people over the years and various surveys that I was participating in when I was on the board of the Audio Publishers Association, it's amazing how much people will listen to a book, not because of the title, but because of the narrator, the voice.
Right. The narrators have their own fan clubs. It doesn't matter what book it is that they're recording, that they have fans who will just listen to it because it is Barbara Rosenblatt or George Guidall or Jim Dale.
Exactly. Now, one thing that you've got too is you mentioned Jim Dale, just an amazing performer. And then he's able to create all those characters, remember them throughout the entire series of Harry Potter. And I remember him telling me that he had a little ledger book where he wrote down all the different characters he performed and what made that voice different than another one to be able to perform it. I think it's something people don't really realize. It's a real skill.
Well, it is truly an art form. I mean, it's not just that I like the sound of your voice, John, that it's really that it takes more than that to be the voice of multiple characters having a conversation at once, or a group of people of different backgrounds and genders in a room talking to each other and keeping that going basically instantaneously as a narrator reads through a dialogue or a scene. It's an extraordinary it's an extraordinary skill to do that. And also it's one of the things I like to point out is that this is, for an audiobook, it's long form performance. We're not talking about, a scene of about 5 minutes or reading a section for 10 minutes. We're talking about hours of maintaining the energy and keeping all those characters straight, but also, being in the mind of the author and, in a sense, channeling that intent of the author through their performance.
Yes, and I've seen where the aspiring authors want to be audiobook talent. I can do that. What advice would you have for an aspiring audiobook voice to help give them a reality check?
It's harder than it looks. And what you need to do is talk to an author who did their first audiobook themselves and then decided that maybe they should turn it over to a professional. And they'll give you lots of reasons why it was a lot harder than it seems.
Yeah. What I've heard successfully done is authors authors doing an envoy, or here's an intro, but it's just their voice. They're not doing the character's voice. It's my voice giving, here's what inspired this, or afterwards, this is what happened as a result of writing this book.
Right. And I think that's very nice. I think it's good to hear the author's voice, but I mean, what they have written is a creative work that took a very special skill to get it to that written form. So, in the same way, I feel like a narration should be done by a professional. And, it takes a lot of experience. We talk about narrators who've done hundreds of audiobooks, but, they're trying different things and different approaches almost every time. And sometimes, it works. Sometimes, it's not as successful for lots of reasons. But
Sure.
that's why we go to movies and look at different films and see different actors taking different roles.
Yeah. It's interesting that I know several authors, I'm very familiar with them, and as a child, what they wanted for their birthday present wasn't a bicycle, it was a typewriter. And I talked to a lot of the audio talent because
Right.
we hired probably close to 300 when we did that whole Stories from the Golden Age line and the Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth and all these books. What they wanted when they were a little kid was a little tape recorder so they could
Right.
record the voices and hear it play back and try and make all different voice sounds. It's like it's a whole different mindset, a whole different, from the get-go, just like the writer wanted to be able to write when he was just a wee tyke. The audiobook narrator wanted to be able to play with voices and hear their voice coming back at them and just say, oh, how can I change this? It seems like it's something that is ingrained with them as it was with the writer with being able to write.
I think you're absolutely right. That's great. That's great to think of.
Yeah, I remember with Jim Eskiman, he said, yeah, I had my little, whatever little see and say thing was that he had, but he had something he could record and then play it back right away. And it would just hold on to the sound until they recorded it again. But he was doing that constantly. It was just like, wow. And several of the other guys would actually talk about, oh yeah, I did this. This is what I had. And it's something that you're right. It's something that's also, it's drilled. It's a lot of work that goes in and develop the ability to create an image, if you're a male, to create an image of a female voice. And if you're female, how to create an image of a male voice or a child. Or you got Nancy Cartwright, who's done several of our audiobooks. She's one that's Bart Simpson, and she had a book that came out, My Life as a 10-Year-Old Boy. And so she's been able to master that, and she's done quite well with it, obviously. But it's amazing what the single voice narrators are able to accomplish.
That's very true. And, interestingly, oftentimes I've heard directors say that a lot of it is the emotional connection that a narrator has with the character, because that's what we as listeners take in. We hear the emotion of the character. And if we can't hear that, or something that the narrator is doing is taking us out of the scene, then, that's not good. We want to be absolutely in the scene with the characters, whatever the emotion is between whatever's happening, whether it's fear or excitement or romance, whatever it is, we experience that. And that's the magic that the narrator does.
Exactly. And then another aspect to that, you got the emotion, but you also have just the technical expertise of delivering a rendition of that story, because you've also got just the equipment you need. See all the little pops, and like I'm here on Hollywood Boulevard, and it's the crazy sound constantly. And my producer on this podcast sometimes does his nut trying to make sure he can get those sounds out, because I don't have. I'm right now, this is the room that I've been, is the Writers of the Future Lounge, which is a beautiful room. But I look out the window and there's Hollywood Boulevard just zooming right in front of me. And we've been known to have a fire truck or police car or just all types of stuff, every 10, 15 minutes,
Well, I'm sorry I can't contribute some seagulls because I'm on the coast of Maine, but it's very quiet right here.
I love your home. Oh my gosh. I used to love when I go over there for our board retreats. That was so nice there. But the point being is that you've got to have a space as well that you can actually record an audiobook where you don't have any of those distractions, because those distractions are distractions to the listener as well. And just like if there's any change of energy level in the audiobook, but there's any other extraneous noises, it will make the final product a distraction, and you'll lose the listener.
Right. And it's great that equipment has gotten much better for being able to filter out sounds and to allow narrators to have their home studios in a way that years ago, it was so clear when something wasn't an actual studio recording. But of course, you've got, you add in some things that come with multicast, which we should talk about, and the sound, the layers of production that are put into something like a full cast drama radio play.
Yeah. I know that when I talked to Michelle, that's one thing that she was obviously very much involved with LA Theater Works and still is. And that's something that's pretty much, once we finished the first round, which is the first audiobooks that you reviewed for us were the ones with Roddy McDowell. Like I mentioned, he was obviously a brilliant actor, just absolutely amazing what he could do with his voice. But when we started the re-release of all the Stories from the Golden Age audiobooks and the Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth and all the other novels written by Mr. Hubbard, they were all done multicast. And in the Stories from the Golden Age specifically, we would have between 4 and 8 actors, and they were all recording in the studio together, which was like the old radio theater, which we were trying to do because these were Stories from the Golden Age. So we wanted to use the format that was most popular back then. So how has that been evolving? Because it's become more and more popular. I know we were somewhat, when we were doing our regular audiobooks, not like LA Theater Works is theater productions that they make into an audiobook. We were actually recording it as an audiobook. And we were somewhat cutting edge at the time when we were doing this back in 2008. How has that evolved?
Well, I think that style is very exciting and dynamic in a way for listeners to certain kinds of stories, because as you say, the Golden Age stories were perfectly suited to a lot of character voices and a soundscape going on underneath and augmenting different things. They were perfect for it. And so I think that style can be very appealing with certain kinds of stories, and the layering of a soundscape and the interplay of voices as they sort of play off each other. And it's not, I think it's quite unusual. Those productions were fabulous. I know that sometimes now multiple voices are recorded as separate tracks and then mixed. And although that usually works, I think you actually probably get more when those actors are in the same room, because they are acting, they're on the set with each other. And you can hear that. I mean, I can't hear what might be missing in a mixed soundtracks, because you don't know what would have happened if those actors had been in the same room. But there's a certain dynamism that I think you feel the energy in certainly some of the Golden Age recordings.
Yeah, that was one thing we had. The audio reviewer for Library Journal, I mean, he personally had to review all of our audiobooks, and we had many reviews that were done through AudioFile magazine as well. And we got several of your earphone awards for them because of that energy. That I think that had a lot to do with it, because it is something that you get when you have, just like right now doing this interview, I'm watching you as I'm talking to you, and it's much better to get a feel for what we're discussing than if it was just over a phone line and not being able to see you. Even though everybody's only hearing this as an audio and not seeing any video, there's going to be a lot more interaction, a lot more aliveness to our discussion than if it was not seeing you and seeing your rosette smile and your
Yes. Well, it is interesting how it evolves. And I think, the multi-voice style of audiobooks is quite popular now, particularly when a book has different points of view. And especially if it's like divided into chapters where you have one character who tells their side of the story, and then you go to another chapter and this is a different character telling their version. And in that case, I think having multiple narrators can be very effective.
Yeah. One thing that's been really, I think, important to realize is just the value of AudioFile magazine to increasing the understanding of what audiobooks is. Because when you have especially like a burgeoning industry like audiobooks, you have one opportunity to make a good first impression. And that was a point that I had. One of my biggest concerns when I was on the board of directors was when it was opening up and just anybody could do the recording and put it out there, and any company could just, okay, I'm going to start up and I'm going to do audiobooks, and didn't have nearly the quality control aspect of it. And as it was a growing industry, and I had these conversations before with somebody. I tried and I didn't like it. It wasn't for me. And so that first impression was a bust. And I think with the AudioFile magazine saying, here's something we say, if you're going to start, you want to check it out, check this out. And then as you got more and more involved with internet and emailing stuff around, people had an opportunity to have that good first impression.
I think that's very important. And we really like to, be a little hard on the titles that we're reviewing so that we're honest about it, and to help a listener know what they're getting in for. So if they're getting into a full-blown soundscape, lots of, sound effects and action, big voices, a big production, that they know that straight up. And if they are more contemplative, that they can find an audiobook that suits that style.
Right.
Because there are a lot of different choices. And I think that's part of what AudioFile also likes to do, is we try to show you all the different options of what's possible. And that's where sometimes we, in reviewing some of our independent publishers' titles, that we find absolute gems that otherwise, would not get any attention as an audiobook. I mean, John Grisham probably doesn't need our attention on a review of his latest audiobook, but there are so many titles of all kinds that, we love to find something and have a rave review of a title that we're all surprised by. It's great.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's really, really important to have somebody, to have a platform that can actually get themselves known. That's one of the things that we pride ourselves on with Writers of the Future, is like, there's so many people that are aspiring to become a writer, or an artist, but how do you get that first leg up? And that's what we provide with Writers of the Future. And that's, right, I think, a very strong similarity to a book that wouldn't otherwise get their notice.
So I think that one of the things that AudioFile tries to do also in helping people find audiobooks is use lots of different formats. So we're still a print magazine, but we also have our newsletters and website. And then we've experimented with podcasts. Of our Behind the Mic podcast is just a small conversation every day of one audiobook, 4 minutes. That's it. We're recommending one title. We play a clip, then we're done. And the next day it's a different audiobook. So it's a whole, doing it that way in a very short format is one different from most podcasts, but also I think we're trying to give people who like podcast formats a way of finding out about an audiobook that might interest them.
It's interesting you bring that up about podcasts. When I was doing research several years ago in Mexico for launching some of our audiobooks in Spanish, there weren't a whole lot of audiobooks out there as CDs. This is well past the cassette stage. They didn't have a whole lot, but what they did in Mexico specifically was podcasts. They'd have the audiobook as a podcast, and it was paid. So you purchase the podcast and you listen to the audiobook that way. And I thought, wow, I don't know that if it's just specifically related to them as audiobooks coming out as podcasts. You have any more information about that?
Well, interestingly, of course, a lot of books were serialized first in print. Charles Dickens released a lot of his titles as serialized chapters. But moving forward, I found out that a number of contemporary writers also released their books as serials including Stephen King's The Green Mile and Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. Didn't realize that those were released, I think, probably as initially maybe as articles in a magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And so the idea of listening to a book in a serialized form, like on the radio reader and chapter a day radio programs were very popular right through, from the 30s. I think that was a style into the 1990s. And I think there is one called Chapter a Day that is still someone is reading a chapter of a book every day that's an audiobook form.
Wow.
Yeah. And we're just trying to renew that a little bit with an idea of a new podcast called Audiobook Break, which is the same thing, taking a full-length recorded audiobook and then cutting it into the chapters and releasing it as episodes of a podcast. And we actually did David Copperfield as our first title in the Audiobook Break podcast. So
that's great.
Something old is new again, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's great on that. So on the, so you're talking about a little bit earlier, you've got the multicast, but multicast is different than radio theater?
It can be. I mean, they're kind of terms that are a little mixed up.
Yeah, I'm confused on this. So I was just curious because you're talking about you have one narrator doing like one chapter, then another narrator doing another one. That's one thing. We've got multiple voices.
Right. And I call those multiple voice or an ensemble, usually with multiple narrators, more than one narrator, but each reading a section and not interacting. So
they're doing all the different voices in that section, but you're the sole voice for that section.
Yes. And they don't interact with any other characters. And when we talk about radio theater or multicast, it's an interaction between the narrators, and often you will have the sound effects or some kind of a soundscape that goes with it.
Right. Yeah, when we did ours, I think our Stories from the Golden Age, we had like 150,000 sound effects. And where we didn't have one, we created them because we didn't, so like if we made sure that if it was whatever it was that the author said, that was the sound that we got. Because I think that's one thing that's probably very real to you as well, working in this industry, that a certain sound will trigger an actual image. And so just the sound of a plane doesn't necessarily evoke a jet versus a biplane versus a crop duster. But if you have the sound of a jet plane or a biplane or a crop duster, then you'll get that image in your mind's eye. And that's one of the things we strove to do. We even went to New York and recorded a Fifth Street taxi. The subways there, so that because they sound different than the San Francisco taxis. We made sure that we had all that stuff there, and that's one of the things too. I think that an audiobook can do that. It lends that extra dimension that just reading the story. And I feel also where if it's just a straight voice read without any other soundscapes to it, you can get an extra dimension there. I know not everybody appreciates that, but I certainly do.
Well, it's interesting. In recent years, there have been some of the graphic novels, particularly for teens, that have been created into audiobooks. On the face of that idea of taking a graphic novel and making it into an audiobook, it seems very strange. How would you do that? But if you think of a graphic novel like a storyboard for as they use in films, then it sort of makes perfect sense that you can layer in sound effects to create the scene. So if you have the one I'm thinking of is Hey Kiddo, and it's a young boy on, there's a scene where he's on the bus to school. Well, you don't have to say that he's on the bus to school. First of all, in the graphic novel, we see him on the bus. So we know that. But if you have the sound that creates that sense of being on a bus, what it sounds like when you're on a bus, then you don't have to say that either.
Right. That's
so
right.
It's a very interesting sort of idea of using a storyboard idea in an audiobook with using sound and different layers of other effects.
Yeah. Now, one thing also, just the audiobook industry in general has just been explosive growth the last decade or so, maybe even more so. And I know you've been tracking it and have been experiencing that too. But I know I remember it was in not last year, maybe the year before, it was the audiobook industry that actually resulted in the overall publishing industry having their sales up for the year, where the mass market and the trade paperback and the hardcover and children's were down. It was the audiobook that was up, and up sufficiently to be able to counteract the other industries being down. So that's pretty impressive. Do you have any more specifics on that, or did I just it all?
Well, I think that is was a wonderful thing for the audiobook industry. And of course, no, the audiobooks did not have to make a transition to a digital form because it already was. So as books were struggling going from paper to digital, and getting people to change their method of access to it, to them, the only way you ever listen to an audiobook is in your ears. So you didn't have to change to it was already digital.
Yeah. What's interesting too is that in the last year and a half with the pandemic and people not going out and traveling, where it was thought that audiobooks were mostly listened to when people go to the gym, which wasn't happening, when they were going out, and traveling, driving around road trips, which wasn't happening, that it would have taken it, quite harshly. And just the reverse happened. Right.
Well, I think so many people were glad to have the story take them away from whatever had been happening all day long, whether it was staring at a screen and trying to stay in school or stay up with your work, or having, our first responders and essential workers having very, very tough jobs and coming home and just wanting to escape a bit. And of course, audiobooks are great for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it was really good that they definitely took off. And now that things are opening up again, you've got a higher base with which it can now continue to grow as an industry.
We hope so. Lots more things to be recorded.
Yeah. So how has the growth been in terms of audiobooks themselves being published? Because there's a lot of at-home studios now. There's more indie audiobook publishers. How's that growth?
I think there are more than 70,000 audiobooks published, I think, last year. So that they're going to be more than that published this year, probably. That's a lot of audiobooks. And there are, platforms now for basically do-it-yourself publishing of audiobooks through several different options for that.
Yes, let's talk about that a bit, because a lot of people listening here are aspiring writers and they'd be interested in this exact topic.
Well, I think the sort of do-it-yourself publishing platforms, there are a couple of them. ACX is the one that is run by Audible. I believe that Findaway Voices is another one. And is it Authors Republic, I believe, is another do-it-yourself platform. And I think that any rights holder, so anyone who owns the rights to the material, can use one of these platforms to select a narrator and get the whole audiobook produced.
So they're like a one-stop shop then. So you can go there and just, you can I want one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these, and just click, click, click. Okay, here's your total. Good.
Sort of, yes, I think that's it. And you can also get some professional help in that's part of it as well.
Because that last little bit there probably wouldn't come constitute itself as profession help, what I just said.
Maybe not.
Yeah. So, so if anybody like has their own property, their own book that they want to be able to turn into an audiobook, so they can either try to pitch it to the general audiobook publishers, or if they find themselves not making any headway with that, then to go to independently get it published. And with those three platforms you're talking about, there might be others as well, but those three platforms that you're mentioning there. So that's good on that. And that's, so you can find, if you listen to an audiobook and you're like, I really like this narrator, you can even actually go for getting that narrator hired to do your book too, I would suspect.
Yes. A lot of the narrators are use those platforms.
See, they list themselves there for hire than to add voice talent for those different stories.
But again, I would just caution, it's a little more complicated than it might appear to get it all right.
Yeah, I'm sure. But if you just methodically go through it, you can actually end up with a quality product of your book.
I think that's true. Yes.
Yeah. Now, here's a little quiz here. So you've been listening to audiobooks for a long time. So do you remember what your first audiobook was that you ever listened to?
I do, because it was it was my aha moment. It might not have been my first, but it was Frank Muller reading John le Carré's Call for the Dead.
Wow.
It's the mystery.
That's amazing.
Amazing that I would remember, or?
Yeah, it's like, I don't remember what my first audiobook was. I just remember the first ones I was listening to was, I had a record on a record player and I play it. And then I just remember also that, I think it was Peter and the Wolf. That's what it was. Peter and the Wolf. And it was also, I had a book that went along with it, and it would do the bling to let me know I'm supposed to turn the page at the book I'm reading. But it was, I'd listen to it over and over and over. I was in elementary school, I think, when I did that. But no, it was so much more fun to me listening to somebody tell me a story.
That's the whole brilliance of it.
Yeah.
Just let them take you away into the story.
Yes. Now, when I go to audiofilemagazine.com and I look at, it has the various about AudioFile Magazine, it has all the different people that work for it. And you're obviously the first person there. And it has your favorite audiobook is Golden Compass.
That's right.
So what makes it your favorite?
So the Golden Compass actually was a full cast audiobook of Philip Pullman's The Golden Compass is the first in a trilogy that he wrote about and alternate or multiple worlds. And it continues to be one of my favorite audiobooks. I always bring it up. It's obviously there under my name. And, it just is a standard to me of how fabulously a production can bring forth the author's intent. And actually, the wonderful part is that the author, Philip Pullman, is the narrator in the story. So he took the narrator's role of the actual story, and then there are, I don't know how many, a dozen or more actors with taking individual character roles.
Wow. So all right, so you're there over the whole spectrum there of audiobooks. You're a connoisseur, and you just really appreciate the art form.
But I love the one I'm with. So if you ask me, like,
I'm glad your husband will probably appreciate that.
Yeah, yes. And, I listened this week earlier to Louise Penny's newest audiobook out just this week called The Madness of Crowds. And I was just totally enthralled in it. But, I just listened to it. So it's right on the top of my mind.
I'm tracking with that. Like I said, I listen to audiobooks because I've got a relatively busy schedule. So I'll listen to an audiobook as I'm exercising or going between different things that I'm doing. And I like to listen to the audiobooks of all my upcoming guests, so I can have a little more sense of, what to talk about and a better feel for what they write and how they write. And it just makes such a difference for me to be able to do it as an audiobook I mean, I'll read them if I can't get it as an audiobook, but then I'll recommend they get an audiobook done with their books. But it makes such a big help for me to get into my guest's head, and what to talk about. Definitely.
Great.
So now AudioFile Magazine also you have your various awards that you issue for the audiobook. So how does that work?
So we really have sort of two or three awards. We have an Earphones Award, which is given fairly it's given sparingly, but there are more of them because we're publishing about 50 audiobook reviews a week. So there are 50 new books being reviewed. And I would say maybe 4 or 5 of them would receive our Earphones Award, which designates that the reviewer and the editors thinks it's an exceptional audiobook. And that would mean exceptional in a number of different ways of, the match between the narrator and the story and the author, the sound quality, the presentation, a number of things, but exceptional in all regards. And I often think that it's very easy for us to recommend an Earphones Award title.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I can say, oh, this one was an Earphones Award. That's one you should pay attention to.
Yeah. Over the course of our producing the Stories from the Golden Age, we had about 20 of those. So that was
great.
It's nice to know what that means now. Okay, good.
Yeah. And so we also have in December, we put out a best audiobooks of the year list, and those are chosen by the editors. It's a fairly short list because we have to bring it down to, like 5 of the best fiction audiobooks of the year or the 5 best mysteries. That's very hard. So sometimes we play favorites, but we always come up with a great list. So that's our best audiobooks of the year. And then we also have a Lifetime Achievement Award to narrators called our Golden Voice Award. And we give that just to a handful of narrators each year. We have about 35, I think, narrators over the whole time that we have designated as Golden Voice narrators. And they are always, pretty much everything they do would be a wonderful listening experience.
Yeah.
So
I haven't heard every one of them, but most of them, because I've used a lot of them myself too with our audio productions, and they're brilliant. They're just brilliant as voice talent.
Yeah.
So on AudioFile Magazine itself, so we talked about this briefly. You've got the monthly magazine, and it's both digital as well as print.
That's right. 6 times a year.
Okay, yep. Good. But then you've also got the e-newsletters, the weekly blogs, the social media. Anything else that you've got that?
The podcasts. So we have the daily podcast of Behind the Mic with AudioFile. And we also have this serialized chapter a day podcast called Audiobook Break. We also, from our articles section in the magazine and the website, we often have videos with narrators, which are on our YouTube channel, our AudioFile YouTube channel. Those are fun.
Yeah.
Little conversations with the narrators about something they're excited about.
Sure. So then if a person were to, just to make sure, because I'm also want to tell people listening to this thing, if you enjoy audiobooks and want to know a good way to be able to find them out is to actually get the AudioFile magazine. If you subscribe to it, do you get both the digital and the print, or is it 2 different subscriptions?
You do.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So then on the digital, then you'll go straight to being able to listen to a bit of it as well before you make your final purchase type thing.
And the website is open, and everything on it is available to any visitor. So you can search for reviews and listen to clips.
Yeah. One thing that's really cool that you do too, which I think is over now this year, but every summer you mix new with old.
The audiobook sync program is a program for teen listeners during the summer. And we actually give away 2 full audiobooks each week for 12 to 14 weeks. And they're pairs of audiobooks, thematically paired. And kind of a wonderful pairing. Maybe sometimes it's an obvious pairing, but not always. But they are thematically paired. We have had great success with teens for summer reading, library programs, school media programs, and the teens have really responded to the choices of the books, and they're free for this short window of time. Each week, it's a different pair.
So the pair isn't like a classic with a new?
We do. Sometimes we do put a classic with a new when it works with the theme. Sometimes not all publishers publish classics. Some of them only publish classics. So we make our pairs on what's available.
I get it. So now then, going back to our aspiring writer, someone who's already got an intellectual property, stuff like that. So what advice would you give for them? Like we talked about different things they could do, but in terms of just a real simple, what would you recommend they do and how to go about it if they want to get an audiobook out of their book?
I think
maybe a decision how to move forward.
Well, I think looking at the self-publishing platforms that we talked about is a very good way to do it. I think not all stories are totally perfectly suited to audiobooks. So I think maybe having a chance to talk to someone about that. I mean, I can't off the top of my head say this wouldn't make a good audiobook, but sometimes stories lend themselves to perhaps different styles of audiobooks. So one story might lend itself to a radio theater style presentation, whereas another one would definitely need to be better, perhaps, if it was a single voice. So I think there are some choices like that to make.
Okay. So then going back to what somebody should actually do then to get themselves published, so it seemed like they would have to also just listen to audiobooks to get a feel for what do you like,
Right. I think that's a very good bit of advice, John, because if you're going to take your story and make it into an audiobook, you probably should have some idea of the range of possibilities. And the only way to do that is to listen to lots of different audiobooks of different styles. And, if you're, you might want to listen within the genre of whatever's being written. So if you're, writing in the sci-fi genre, you might want to listen to different things. I mean, there are some spectacular radio dramas and very highly produced programs like Neil Gaiman's The Sandman, which was out, and the new one is about to come out. Those take an extraordinary amount of production, but there are some equally affecting and dynamic single voice performances, some of the Podium publishing titles, including Andy Weir's new title, Project Hail Mary, which is a single voice, great single voice performance by Ray Porter. So they're very, there's lots of different choices in types of production, and listening to lots of audiobooks, you're going to find ones that appeal to you. And I think as a writer, you could see your story produced like that. So that would be good to know.
Absolutely. Okay, that's great. Now, one last thing too on, because you have reviewed so many of the audiobooks that I've published, so I got to get something here so it might count as itself patting myself on the back, but I'm very proud of what we've produced and had some amazing reviews from AudioFile magazine. Anything that stands out for you? Because you've done various articles also, and you've had the interviews with Jim Meskimen, and we did our Battlefield Earth book, which won an Audie as well as the Earphone Award, and we've had several other ones. But anything in particular that stands out for you? I realize it's you may or may not have an answer to this, in which case,
Well, I think one of the things that I've loved doing is some of the in the studio articles about how the audiobooks have been produced, and the amount of care and thought and creativity that's gone into, not just casting, but all the sound effects, the mixing of it, and that dynamism of having the actors in the same room.
right.
And those are quite fun. We've done a couple of those in the studio in interviews.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's been great talking to you again here. And just so that everybody knows one more time, so if they want to be able to get a subscription to AudioFile or just to check out reviews, where would they go?
To audiofilemagazine.com.
Okay, good. And then now your magazine is available does it work when they actually get the print copy if they just want to go to some outlet?
Nope, you've got to get it from us.
Okay, good. All right.
For print.
So,
And the digital copy is available also from our website, so you can check it out. And then, of course, there are our podcasts, the Behind the Mic with AudioFile Magazine and Audiobook Break.
that's great. Well, again, thank you very much. And it's been, I think it's really important that the aspiring writer or the writer that's been published has more understanding of what this industry is and how they could take advantage of it to be able to, if nothing else, to further monetize their intellectual property. But it's a great way that people are enjoying a book that they wouldn't otherwise read, but if they can listen to it, they'll be able to enjoy a book that, is a great way to be able to read.
Right, and to broaden the audience for all of those writers. I think that's a big piece of it. Is a lot of people who are avid readers consume with what they have they play into their ears in audiobooks.
Absolutely. Again, thank you.
Thanks, John.
And thank you for listening. Subscribe to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We have also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well by just typing in Writers of the Future. Again, I highly recommend you read the Writers of the Future series. These are, after all, who our judges have selected as the best of the best new writers and artists. They can be found at writersofthefuture.com, at Amazon, or wherever you get your books. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you, John.